going to be a great pleasure to sit with U.S. Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander, retired, Jack Carr, and now New York Times best-selling author multiple times, and soon to be one of the hottest properties on streaming television for his books, which include True Believer, there you go, and the most recent Savage Son. I, Jack, am a huge fan of your work, sir. I am also dyslexic, so throughout my life, reading has been a real problem. So instead, I listen and thank God for Audible, and you do a fantastic job in writing, but then Ray Porter, the guy that reads these for you, is fantastic. And I just can't say enough nice things about, you know, the tension that he brings. And folks, if you want to read a great thriller, any of these books from Terminal List, the Terminal List, which was Jack's first, all the way through these, and now he's working on book number 4. Man, you're a prolific dude, Jack. I can't believe that you just jumped like you have from being a SEAL team platoon commander to being an author and just cranking them out. I mean, Stephen King barely cranks them out as fast as you do.
Well, he was one of the first ones to get on the one a year type of a program. Him and Clap Cussler really set the bar with that as they moved from the 70s into the 80s. And then fans started to expect that, because before that, you didn't really expect one a year from authors necessarily. It could be 2 years, 2.5 years. Maybe it was a different character, that sort of thing. But those guys really kind of led the way as far as the one book a year program. And so that's the one I'm on. So as soon as this is over, I'll go back downstairs to that guest room and jump right back in to book 4, get that thing done by the end of summer or middle of summer, and then go to work on edits with the editor in New York. So that's the schedule.
Fabulous. And I truly have enjoyed these books. When I heard you on Joe Rogan's show, I was delighted that Chris Solis, our head of marketing and business development, was able to get Jack through his publicist to come onto the program, folks, because I think he's got a lot of cool observations about the world, about what it's like to be a small businessman, because even though he's selling hundreds of thousands of books, it's a small business. I mean, you're a small businessman, and what's so cool also is you're supporting small businesses. You know, bookstores, Jack, are something that were sort of an afterthought. People, you know, migrated towards Amazon and Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all that kind of stuff. And the regular small booksellers were really in a world of hurt. But even during the launch of all 3 of these books now, you've been out there helping these guys stay in business, if you will.
Yeah, it's I mean, bookstores, I have such great memories growing up surrounded by books. My mom was a librarian, so we spent a lot of time both in libraries and in local independent bookstores, because growing up there weren't the behemoths yet. There were just small independent bookstores. So you'd go in there, and I'd obviously would naturally gravitate to the history section, military section, and then the books that had the thrillers by guys like David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and Tom Clancy and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock, Mark Olden, all these guys in the 80s that had protagonists that I wanted to have a background like in real life one day. So before the internet, before you could just type in U.S. Navy SEAL on a computer, you had to get that information from somewhere, and that somewhere was books and magazines, both on the fiction side of the house, and then also the nonfiction that didn't really delve too deeply, at least in the 80s, into special operations. There'd be a sentence here, a paragraph there, maybe a chapter here, but that was about it. You could almost read it all. Today, you really can't do that. But jumping back really quick to what you said about the audiobook, I didn't really know much about audiobooks before I got into this space, because I'm a reader. So growing up with a mom like that, we were always reading. And so it's just naturally a part of me. So when Simon & Schuster called and said, hey, who do you want to read your audiobook? I didn't really know. I hadn't thought about that yet. I thought they would I didn't know I got to pick. I was very new to all this. And they said, well, pick somebody. And I said, well, okay, how much time do I have? And they're like, oh, by the end of the day. And it was, it was like 11 noon here, something like that. So New York time is creeping up on the end of the day. So I just started listening to all these different samples on Audible, just clicking, listening. Mm-hmm. Came across Ray Porter, and man, he was amazing. And I thought, this is the guy. And so I asked Simon & Schuster, hey, can we get this guy? And they said, well, we'll ask him. And he was just amazing. And what I didn't know at the time is that these narrators bring a whole audience to your work. People follow narrators just like they used to follow just authors. They'll go and see what that narrator is reading next and go to that regardless of the author. So I had no idea that Ray Porter was going to bring this whole audience of audiobook listeners to the Terminal List, to the first one. And then that one got nominated for Audiobook of the Year by Audible. So we went to New York and put on the tuxes, and I see it up there next to Stephen King. And that was just totally surreal. And anyway, it was amazing. So people really do love those audiobooks, and Ray Porter knocks it out of the park every time.
Yeah. What really got me involved in reading these kinds of books was, I guess, Richard Marcinko. Mm-hmm. When I read Rogue Warrior, which was a totally just random thing. I fly back and forth, Jack, to New York every single week, except during this lockdown.
Right.
And I've been doing that now for 10 years, virtually every single week, either on private or on commercial with American. And I was walking by one of the bookstores out at O'Hare, and I saw Marcinko's book, and he had the long black ponytail. And
right over there on my shelf. Yeah.
Yeah. What a great book. And so I bought several of his, and then I went out to one of those small bookstores, like maybe 4 or 5 years later. And I didn't like his subsequent books nearly as much. After Rogue Warrior, they were still okay, but they weren't the same, didn't have the same kind of oomph. But nonetheless, I thought he was a cool dude. Figured, okay, I'll go out and have him sign my book. So I went out to this bookstore, met him, saw, what he looked like in person, because that's a thick dude.
He's a big boy.
Yeah. And then I think it was a little over a year ago, I really was getting into Jocko Willick's
book. Those are on my shelf over there, all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm zeroing in on these. but Jocko, is crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And you might not say that, but I'm far enough away from him.
Yeah.
That I can probably say.
I don't know. I'm gonna look around. Be careful. Yeah.
But what a good dude. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, Jocko, would you ever like to come on television with me and talk about discipline, talk about, what you do to prepare and all that sort of thing, the things that I'm very intrigued by about people like yourself. I played pro football for 4 games. So I'm not that guy. I'm not the, guy. My brother Pete played for 6 years, Jack, in the NFL. So that's a guy that is that guy. Okay. He's like you and Jocko in football, not in SEAL teams, but did a fantastic job and knows what it takes to do that. So I figured if I could get Jocko on television, the reason that I love discipline so much is when you're trading, it's all about discipline. Now, it's not the same dedication that you guys have. We're not running through sand, and we're not, carrying those logs or that crazy raft, and all of you guys running out into the surf and getting thrown over backwards, and all of these stories I've heard about buds and all that. But the discipline to be able to cut those losses and move on without it screwing with your head. And believe it or not, in the opening of the Terminal List, I'm not going to ruin it for folks, but in there, you talk about, or you're writing about a team that is in trouble, mm-hmm. and how it just has to be instinct what you do next. You don't panic, you're not running around, and you're basically saying, okay, let's do a quick recap. What do we have? What do we have to do next? Go. and it's got to be instinct, and you've got to do it. And if you don't, you're in a world of hurt. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about, obviously, BUDS, just like going through Harvard, BUDS is all about weeding people out, seeing, do you have what it takes to say, I'm not going to quit when I have tough competition, whether it's you inside your head or whether it's something outside. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yep. So first I'll go to that scenario you were just talking about, that chaos of the battlefield, which can, chaos in life, everything's relative depending on your experience and what you're bringing to the table and your levels of tolerance and what have you. But it's all about taking that breath. And this is what people who listen to Jocko will have heard this a million times. And he would tell us going through training, he put me through 2 of my pre-deployment workups. Hey, when things are getting crazy out there, you just take a step back, take a breath, you look around and you make a call. And typically they'll then throw, once you do that right and make a good call, then they throw something else at you and you do that right, then you're getting multiple things happening at the same time. So they're trying to make it as crazy and chaotic as possible. And then what you do then is the same thing, but you just prioritize. You prioritize and then you execute. So you handle them one at a time, just like you would if it was just one problem to deal with. Well, you have 5 of them, figure them all out at once. No, you prioritize those, you rack and stack them, and then deal with them in order of priority. So that's kind of how that works. But in BUDS, it's all about finding that person that has the grit that we're looking for. We're looking for that never quit attitude. And there is a problem with that though. So we have a great program. It's been working well for forever. You couldn't start this program today also, by the way. You couldn't come up with this idea, go to senior level leaders and say, hey, I want to come up with this 6-month to a year training program. And what we're going to do for one of these weeks is we're going to keep these students up for a full week. We're gonna have them on the verge of hypothermia. We might lose a couple every now and again. We're gonna do these crazy swims, obstacle courses. Here's what they're gonna have to do. Senior level leaders today would say, no way. We just live in a world where that probably is not gonna happen. But this is a legacy program. It's been around for a while. It has great results, meaning that 80% of the people, no matter what we do ahead of time to prepare them, 80% still quit. And that's, I think that's a testament to the program in that it really does find that person with that mental fortitude to make it through and never quit. That shows us that person who has that grit, because we train people up now to high levels of fitness. We talk to them about leadership, about resiliency, give them all the tools that they need to make it through. But they're those intangible things you can't teach. There's that level of fitness that doesn't matter. Any average high school athlete can make it through BUDS physically. It's that mental fortitude that we're looking for. But the problem with that is that you can have someone or people that make it through the program that don't have the character that you're looking for. So how do you test for character? And that's a tougher one than just seeing how tough someone is and how much you can throw at them with them continuing to move forward. The character piece is tough, and the Israeli special operations, those guys do it a little better. They test for character along the path as well, which is something we typically don't do. So that might be something we can always improve on. But that base level program of finding that person who will never quit, that we're very good at.
Well, one of the things you guys also do, we're lucky enough, Jack, that we've got a wealth management firm in addition to what my brother Pete and I do on television. We mainly are using data, and you and I can bounce around about data for a little bit, but we also manage money for people. And there's a guy who provides a lot of the nutrition for special warriors like yourself, Robert Irvine. Are you familiar with him?
I'm not.
Okay. He works with he works at the Pentagon with a lot of folks, and he's got TV shows and things like that. But he basically figures out, okay, what type of warrior or what type of work does this body need to do? And then here's the best fuel for that body. Because you guys, obviously, you're out there and, when you're eating an MRE, that's a whole different thing. If it's the crappy, MREs. And most of them are, of course.
They'll give you some calories. But calories, that's for sure.
Yep. You just need those calories because you guys are burning it like crazy when you're carrying all those packs. I'll switch gears, though, back to data. So my brother and I, we analyze the stock market. Sort of like, one of the very impressive things about your books, and I'm sure it carried over from your experience in the teams, was that you have to analyze all of this data and analyze the input you're getting from people about the intel that you're gathering to decide what's the best way to hit this problem, whatever it might be. And that's the same sort of thing we do, except, knock on wood, we do it with computers instead of, we don't have people at the NSA, CIA, FBI, naval, whatever intelligence. We don't have all that. So the computers are doing most of it for us. But how difficult is it for guys that are actually the sharp end of the spear, the tip of the spear, I think you guys refer to it, to be taking that intel from people who are thousands of miles away, and it's not just, hey, here's where the headquarters are. That might be pretty easy between drones and satellites and all that kind of stuff. But instead, when they're trying to give you something about the sort of people you're going up against and what you have to do to beat them.
Yeah, so in the pre-September 11th days when we were just training, it was a little different. You train, you do a month out in the desert doing some desert warfare, land warfare type training. You go up to Kodiak, Alaska for cold weather warfare training. You're diving for a couple of weeks. You're jumping out of planes for a couple of weeks. You're going out to do close quarters combat somewhere, and then do an urban warfare center to do all that. So you're doing all these different things. And as part of those, you do these field training exercises where you're typically handed a package of intelligence and you go through that. So it's given to you by someone else, by a higher command type authority. And you take that, and then your job is to figure out how to solve the tactical problem and go in there and get whoever you need to get or accomplish whatever that mission is. After September 11th, that shifted, and it shifted back to what the guys had been doing in Vietnam, which was really self-generating intelligence on the ground based off targets that you hit. So you go out, you hit a target, you do some what used to be called battlefield interrogation. Now it's called tactical questioning, to make it sound a little more politically correct. Same thing, kind of like in Bud's surf torture, when you see those pictures of those guys and we're in the surf zone and the water's coming over us and it's midnight and you're shivering, you're on the verge of hypothermia. They used to call that surf torture forever, and now it's called surf conditioning. So exact same thing, just different name, and to make it more politically correct. But what we found after September 11th and going into first Afghanistan and then Iraq was that no one was going to hand you a target package from Washington, D.C. I mean, they had some things that they can do back there, some national level type intelligence that's very technical where they can help. But really what we're going to be doing is self-generating that on the battlefield. And we have maybe a list of people on our target deck, and we're going to fight, but that's going to grow as we build out, just like you see, almost like you see in these police shows on TV where they have the crime syndicate up there. And back in the old school days, they'd have like yarn connecting them with tacks, like who's connected to who and how and all that for the crime families. Well, very similar over there. And then they have the picture that doesn't have a face to it. And they'd have some really grainy ones that weren't very good. And then they'd have the mug shot, but they'd have all that stuff up on a board where you could visually see it. So similar after September 11th, we'd go in, hit a target, get additional intelligence from that target, from the people there, and then from cell phones, from computers, from all the stuff that you would naturally take off target, just papers, what we call sensitive site exploitation. Maybe take those back, give them to our technical guys who would go through and figure out what we could pull off those. How does that fit in to the people we're going after? Can we hit another target based on this before they move or change their pattern of life? But also important when you're building these things, these patterns of life, going after these targets, is to make sure you're not being used by somebody over there that leverages you to do
take
something.
Out some of their enemies.
Yeah, their neighbor who stole their goat 100 years ago, and now they say, oh, I can just tell them that this is Taliban, and I can, so we had to be very careful of that. So I think we might have fallen for that a few times in the early days, but you really need disaggregate and disassociated intelligence networks, human intelligence on the ground, so you don't get played and settle some centuries-old grudge because now the Americans are here and I'm going to get to them first and tell them something, and they're going to run off because they're all excited to take out targets, and they're going to solve this problem for me, and I can solve that problem with that centuries-old goat feud. So you do all that, you build those patterns of life, you take all that intelligence, the human side from those disassociated networks, and the technical stuff that we have access to. You put all that together to build these patterns of life, and then figure out where your target's going to be and when, and then you choose the time and the place going to take them out. So that's kind of how you take that that data and analyze it and figure out how best to utilize it to accomplish your mission.
Gotcha. Now, I know that you were over in Russia recently, and it was for one of the books, but it was, I'm sure, also just that you wanted to more or less experience it, not as a soldier, but this was after your service. And by the way, I was remiss. Thank you for your service.
Oh, appreciate that.
We,
support.
Many of us are, and in fact, our firm, Market Rebellion, my brother Pete and I, the members of our team here, have supported the Navy SEAL Foundation.
Oh, awesome.
We were out in Coronado, gosh, it must be 4 years ago now, Jack, but we were out there, and one of the admirals, and I wish I could remember, it wasn't Pilsner.
It might have been used by a different name.
Yeah, he gave us several mementos, as well as some wristbands and things like that. But we were able to raise, I think, like $20,000-$30,000 for the SEAL Team Foundation.
Nice.
That at the time was one of the ones that needed some support because there had been some issues, but there always are, because as you know, we hope that all of you guys come home, but we know that there are things that happen, especially to operators like you guys. And that's why I say thank you for your service.
Well, appreciate that. And it's even the training is inherently so dangerous in and of itself. Like, you lose people in training. There's those wives, in our case, and kids left behind. And so, yeah, there's a lot of kids out there growing up without dads, and it's those foundations really do help them and get them to summer camps, take care of some learning disability type stuff for them. So they're just amazing organizations out there that help. I
agree. Now, the reason I brought up Russia was, I think it's 2 years ago right now, 2 years ago in April, actually, I was over there speaking about finance and so forth, and found it very different than the first time I was there, which was in the 70s. I was there in 74 when it was closed. My dad's a doctor.
Okay.
So he was teaching surgeons over there a certain technique for kidney transplants.
Okay.
And so they allowed us to go in. All the rooms were bugged everywhere we went. There were, crazy amounts of surveillance because we were Westerners and because they know you just by your look. I mean, literally, if like a pair of blue jeans, this is back in the 70s, was a couple $100 in Russia. I mean, it was black market stuff. I have a wall full of medals that I got from taking the subway and trading chewing gum with the kids on the subway when I was, 10 and 12 years old, back and forth to Russia back in those days. And it was a riot. It was very safe, but, it was very different than what it was now. When I went 2 years ago, man, there were, there's Uber. I mean, so literally, just grab your phone. There's Uber. There's Google Translate, which literally I could just speak right into my phone and it translates for the driver if they didn't speak English and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was really interesting when we went into the shopping malls. And I don't know if you had the same experience, but when we went in, they had magnetometers as you entered this was in Moscow City. So that brand new section of Moscow. And as you went in there, they had a big guy who looked like a bouncer at any bar, bald head, huge, gentleman that would be there, and usually a bunch of tats on the side of his neck or something.
Yeah.
And he would wave through most of what he thought were Westerners, just wave them through, not even stop them like I'd say, well, I got a phone or whatever. And he'd go, come on. He knew it wasn't what he was looking for. Mm-hmm. But then you'd see somebody who was, I don't know, former Russian military or whatever, that would come walking towards him and he'd, put up the hand, and then the guy'd open his jacket and he'd have 2 45s. usually right here in a series of clips. And the guy'd go, okay, hand him over. He'd hand him over, put him in a locker, and let the guy go into the mall.
Interesting.
So that's something I haven't seen in America.
Yeah.
It was pretty interesting to see it over there, and just wondered, what was your impression when you were walking around in Russia? It's different, but it's similar in many ways.
Yeah, so I went to Kamchatka Peninsula, which is just south of Siberia. And instead of going all the way around the world, I went from Alaska and flew over there. So like an hour and a half, hour, 45-minute flight, I think, and dropped right back down because the action in this third novel really takes place between Montana and Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia. So I knew I needed to go over there, needed to put boots on the ground, needed to get that local flavor you can only get from walking around there, from talking to people, because you go over and you get things when you do this kind of research that you don't have written down as something you're looking for at the outset. You just go there, and through the experience, you see these things or talk to people that give you so many great ideas to weave into the storyline. And so that was one of the main points of going over there. I wanted to walk that soil, see what kind of cars they had, what kind of backcountry vehicles they used, what kind of snow machines they used, how they survived out there in the backcountry, and all that. So I have been to Moscow though, and that was 93 is when I was there. So I'd like to go back and see what it looks like now. Also went down to Ukraine to Odessa back then, and that worked its way into the pages of my second novel, In True Believer. I've been to the catacombs under those streets, and just knew some of the history of those catacombs from World War II and before. And so I wanted to weave that into the storyline as well. So some of the places that I use in the stories, I've been there in the past, just happen to have gone to these places, and it makes sense for me to weave them into the storylines. And other places like Mozambique, I went out there to spend some time on the ground, learn about the poaching situation, learn about Chinese influence in the mining operations, both legal and illegal, and take that local flavor and weave that into the story. So I wanted to do the same with Russia. But when I got to Kamchatka Peninsula, we spent a little bit of time there in a city, but then it was right out to the backcountry, because that's really where the story takes place out there.
Yeah. And I guess
you go out there and do that research, and it's fun. It's fun.
And I imagine a Russian bear is an even different bear than the kind of, although a Kodiak bear is a whole different animal too. And they're probably very related, because back when there was the ice bridge, they probably came back and forth.
Yep. Brown bears. So that's, that weaves its way into the storyline as well. And I get to do a hunt out there in Kamchatka Peninsula, and it was a crazy one. So it worked out well. It worked out well. I love doing that research. So this fourth one that I'm working on now, it's I'm mostly using places I've been to. I haven't run into something where I need to rush out, thank goodness, because during this time of COVID-19, a little bit harder to travel. Would take a little more energy, effort to figure it out. And then you have to go through the decision process. Do you really want to or not right now, with all the uncertainty in the air, not knowing who to trust with this information that's coming in from multiple different sources, different political parties, different doctors, different organizations. It's just a very, I know we kind of use that term uncertain, but there's not a better one for it right now, because it's hard to figure out who to trust during these times. So I'm lucky with book 4 that I've been to all the places that I need to have gone in order to have done that research. So that's how book 4 is working out.
Now, there was a scene in the Terminal List, Jack, where James Reese is in Chinatown, I think, with the reporter.
Yep.
And they're being stalked. They don't know it yet, but they're being stalked by somebody who's been turned. And as that is happening, one of the discussions, I think I'm in the right area of the book, was he's thinking, James Reese, your alter ego, is thinking about when it's as important to know when to pull the trigger as when not to pull the trigger. And he flashes back to I can't remember if it was Ramadi or which one of the battles that he was in, when he's thinking about, there was this guy on a bicycle and blah, blah, blah. And I won't spoil it for folks, but that really resonated with me, both because of that story and because Inspector, the James Bond thriller, M, who takes over for Judi Dench as, the head of MI6, he basically is saying to one of the other guys in the spy world over there, it's as important to know when not to pull the trigger as it is to know when to pull the trigger. He said, because they're not just killing machines. They're over there to do a job. But if it was just killing machines, yeah, you can put up a drone to do that. But even then, somebody's pulling the trigger on that drone. Was that a message you were trying to get out with that as well? That sometimes you really do have to decide, you know what, this is not the time. I don't need to do this right now because that is not a threat. And is that just something that has to come over time?
Yeah, so you're close to that portion in the book when that happens. But yeah, it's James Reese, the protagonist of the novels, who's a former enlisted Navy SEAL sniper, which is my background, and then he becomes an officer, which is also my background. And then when readers meet him in the first novel, he's at that stage where he is going to do his last deployment and then get out and take care of the family. So I'd come back from Iraq. I realized, hey, it's time for me to get out, take care of my family. It's been a good run, but it's time to move on. And I'd made that rank where if I stayed in, then I was going to be, yeah, you can continue to be a leader, but really you're more of a manager in today's military when you reach that 05 rank. Yeah, you're a team, you're in charge of a team, but you're really in that tactical operations center, you're allocating assets. And if you go out there with the guys in the field and try kicking in doors with them, you're going to get in the way and probably get someone killed. So they don't even want you out there at that stage. So that's where I was. And I realized that's I've done everything I'm going to do in the teams. I did everything I came in to do, and it's time to get out. But I think what made the book, the first one, resonate with Simon & Schuster, who sees thousands of these things each and every year, is that personal element, is how I took the emotions attached to certain things I was involved with downrange, and then I applied them to a completely fictional narrative. So I didn't have to have an interview with someone who was a sniper, ask them a bunch of questions, and then kind of have that trickle through my filters and my lens, and then apply that to a fictional character. No, it was my experience downrange that I then applied to a fictional narrative. So if the emotions behind what the protagonist is experiencing in the book feel raw and real and authentic, that's because they are. And in that particular story, that was, I changed it. It happened to me in Najaf, Iraq in August of 2004, but I changed it for the book. I changed it to Fallujah, I think, in the book. And I combined two things that happened in Najaf 2004 into one incident. And it's where James Reese can take a shot and decides not to do it because something just doesn't feel right about it. Just doesn't seem quite right, even though by the rules of engagement and how those were interpreted by the higher level command authority, he could have taken that shot. He doesn't. And that he sleeps very well at night because of that. And that's something that happened to me. And it's something I passed on to my snipers and my guys as I worked my way up the ranks, just so I could pass on a little bit of that experience to them. Because my goal as a leader was always to have my guys do the job better in the future than I had done it for them. So I wanted to share my experience, both successes and failures, lessons learned, so that they could do it better for the next generation and make us stronger as an organization going forward. So that was always the goal. And then it just made sense to weave that story into the narrative of the first book, into the Terminal List.
It's very, very positive and very successful. Now, when you came out of the military, as you're coming out, you did, I guess I'm going to call it decompression or whatever, where you basically get reconnoitered back into civilian life. And as you said, people like Jocko never even go through that. They just go, hell with it, I'm just out.
Yeah.
But you not only did that, you went through that, but then you helped other people when they were coming out. And you know where I'm going with this, because one of the people you helped ended up reaching out to you and saying, I think I can help you after the fact. Would you mind telling that little story here?
Yeah. So it's how the whole Amazon deal with Chris Pratt came about. And yeah, it was just a very natural thing for me to do. My last couple of years in, I decided to get out. So I was at what we call a shore duty billet. So I wasn't taking guys downrange anymore, because when I was taking guys downrange, that was my sole focus, is being the best combat leader I can possibly be every single second, not just when I'm at the team or training, but also when I'm at home, is focused on that. And our families have to know that that pendulum, when you're doing that sort of thing, is all the way over here, because it has to be. That's what you owe those guys under your command. That's what you owe the country, the mission. And eventually, when I got back from Iraq, that started to swing back. I could take a breath, realize I was going to get out, realize, hey, I wasn't taking guys downrange anymore. In fact, I'm at our training command called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, and I'm like the COO of that, so the operations officer, kind of managing day-to-day type operations. But really, and you have about 200 staff, 800 students, I think that's what it was. But you have different phases, so you have essentially different little mini commands under there that are running each phase of that training. So it was not nearly as stressful as, or stressful is not the right word, but nearly as intense as what I'd been doing leading up to that time, because I had such great people working in those phases. And one of them was my friend, who said I can now say his name. So Jared Shaw. So one of them, great guy, such a solid operator, good dude. And he comes and lets me know that he's going to get out of the military. And I said, hey, well, let's come on in, sit down, let's talk about it and see where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What are your goals? And then we just talked about it, and I kind of pointed him in the right direction, I guess, and introduced him to some people in the private sector that I knew that were in industries that he was interested in moving into, and he never forgot it. And I thought it's just what you do for people that whether they're staying in the military or not. And it was interesting because I shouldn't say a lot, some leaders wouldn't like it when guys got out, and they'd be like, screw that guy, he's leaving. And I just never understood that. I'm going to help out good guys, whether they're staying in or they're getting out. I'm going to put the same amount of effort into if they're staying in or getting out, do everything I can to help them along. So anyway, he calls me back like 5 years later, I guess, maybe 6 years later. I'm out of the military. First book is coming out soon, and this is fall of 2017. And he calls me and he says, hey, do you remember me? I'm like, yeah, of course, Jared. How's it going? Great to talk to you. And we talked a little bit. He said, hey, and I always wanted to call and thank you for what you did for me as I was getting out. And I was like, hey, no problem. That's absolutely. And he said, hey, I heard you have a book coming out soon. And I said, yeah, it comes out in a few months. And I have these galley copy things that are early readers edition. I can send you one. And he said, no, well, yeah, I'd like to read that, but I'd also like to give it to a friend of mine. And I said, who's that? And he said, Chris Pratt. And the crazy part is that as I was writing, I pictured Chris Pratt playing this role. And even crazier than that, I pictured Anton Fuqua directing it. And now Amazon's picked it up. Chris Pratt is starring. Anton Fuqua is directing. I'm an executive producer and helping out on the scripts. And it's, just amazing how things come kind of full circle like that. And yeah, I had no idea I had any connection to those guys as I was writing this. And then it turns out that unbeknownst to me, I did. And thank goodness Jared called me. Thanks, Jared.
Like karma. That sounds like karma, Jack.
Yeah, it's hey, for whatever it is, it's I feel very fortunate, and I always try to we have whatever our circle is, whatever our circle of influence is, whether it's our family or extended family and a few friends, or it's like Chris Pratt, 28 million followers on a social media platform that all think they know you because of that interaction that we can have today on these different platforms. You can choose how you want to influence them and how you want to essentially be remembered. You want to be remembered as someone who's always negative and dragging everybody down, and or you can choose to do things in a positive way and positively influence those in your circle, however small or large it is. So, I think I try to make a conscious decision to do things in a positive light and help people along however I can.
Yeah, well, that's coming back to you, and that's going to be a fabulous series. I understand it's 8 or 10 different episodes, something like that.
Yep. I think now it's 8 episodes right now. Things kind of always change. I don't ask too many questions because I'm just happy to be here. I don't want to be the guy that's asking too many questions. But it looks like an 8-part series. The first episode's all written out, and it's great. It's fantastic. I could not be more pleased with how it turned out. And there's a writer's room that's together now, and they'll build out the next 7 episodes, and I'm advising on that. So it's a lot of fun. And usually they try to get rid of the author as soon as they can in one of these things because they don't want the author sitting there saying, you ruined my vision or something like that. But I've been a student of this genre, both on the writing side of the house and movies too, because as a child of the 80s, I'm reading these different books and I'm watching these movies, and then I'm reading books that are adapted to movies and noticing the differences, taking note of that. And I looked back on First Blood, which was a novel written in 1972 by David Morrell, created the character Rambo. Much different than the film in the early 80s with Sylvester Stallone, but both fantastic. I love the movie, love the book, very different. So I was able to compartmentalize my book from this, a way to tell the story visually, and realizing those are different mediums. And so you do different things in telling stories, whether it's written or it is visually on the screen. So I'm able to compartmentalize those, differentiate them, and just want this to be the best series it can possibly be.
Absolutely. Now, Jack, is that just the first book? And then, you know, if it's the wild success that I think it will be, will then we get to the second and the third and perhaps the fourth book as well?
I think so. We'll see how the first one does, but I think it probably depends on that. But right now, it's the first book that is adapted into 8 different episodes. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Fantastic. By the way, one of the questions on Twitter from somebody was that they heard that you had spinal surgery. And the question was, did you get relief from it? Because you don't appear to be somebody who's suffering in pain right now, but spinal surgery is a big deal.
Yeah, I had a C6, C7. The Navy wanted to fuse it. And I was like, well, let me go get a second opinion on this. So went up to someone who does a disc spine surgery center that does all the Red Bull athletes. So they're used to working on kind of younger people that have these types of injuries. So people doing crazy stuff on motorbikes or jumping out of planes or doing what all these Red Bull athletes do that's very extreme, that in the past, you wouldn't have seen those kind of injuries in people that are so young. That would have been rare in like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. More so those type of injuries happen to people that are in their 70s, 80s. But when you're doing these extreme, crazy sports, you injure yourself, you know, the way someone old is degenerating would. So anyway, I went up there and did that kind of a surgery where they went in and shaved off a bone spur that was pinching a nerve that was making my left arm atrophy, and it was crazy. But you know what? I always look at these guys that come home missing arms, missing legs, missing eyes, dealing with that emotional trauma from the battlefield, traumatic brain injury. So I think I'm so fortunate. So even though there is still pain there, it's not, my left arm's not atrophying anymore and all that sort of thing. So it fixed that problem. Is there pain every day? Yes, there is. But I think of every single time I feel that pain, I feel so lucky that that's the only thing that I'm leaving the military after 20 years and all those deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. That's what I'm leaving with, is a little pain in my neck. Like, I can deal with that. That's fine. In relative terms, look at these guys coming back that are just destroyed in body and mind after going over there to serve their country. So I think about that each and every day. Or anytime I go, oh gosh, I wish I didn't have this, I think, oh, you know what? I am so lucky that this is all I have. So I kind of look at it in those terms.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm lucky. My brother's broken all of his fingers on both hands, both knees, playing pro football.
Yeah.
And he's still very lucky, and obviously wasn't putting his life on the line the way that you guys were. But let me ask you a quick question. I know I do want to be respectful of your time. So social media. This was really interesting to me, and I think to many of the people watching this will be interesting, that you decided, just like, I guess, like James Reese would, you took out your notepad and you started figuring out, okay, social media, how do I figure this out? A year before you actually put yourself on social media, you sat there looking at what's good about it, what's bad about it, how do I exploit it in the best way? Who are the people that are doing it right? Tell us a little bit about that, if you would, Jack.
Yeah. So I never had a Facebook account. Prior to that, I never had a MySpace account. I never did anything on social media. Back then, there was no benefit to having a social media profile. It could only do harm to both you, your family, the team. It was just another way for the enemy to exploit information. And we really handed a lot of information over to the enemy. Or you can look at it the same, criminals in the past would have to like case something in person. Well, now we're handing that information over to them if they're trying to case you, your life, where you go, your patterns, to do whatever they want to do. Today it's different. Before I get back on track, today it's different. Now it's odd. You are now, there's a red flag that pops up if you don't have that sort of a profile if you're moving into kind of the more nebulous world of the intelligence agencies and the kind of the darker side of military special operations. So it's an interesting thing to have to deal with that I'll be writing about in future novels. But yeah, I'd never done any of that. And I still, as I crept up on publication date for the first book, I still didn't, I didn't realize that it was a small business quite yet. I was slowly getting there, but I thought that, because all my life I thought Navy SEAL, write fiction, and as an author of fiction, you can go up, live in a cabin, you just write up there alone, you send it off to New York, maybe you do a couple of little edits back and forth, and then you start the next project. I didn't realize that it is a business like any other, and that anything you do, that for starting a coffee shop or anything else, you have to do as an author. So all the branding, the marketing, the co-branding, advertising, budgets, social media, everything that you have to do for any business, you also have to do as an author. So I slowly started exploring social media just by getting an account and looking at what was going on, seeing who is doing it right, who's doing it in a way that I didn't think was quite so appropriate. How do you best leverage this as an author? Who are some companies out there that I can look at that have done it right and really done a good job at providing that customer experience via this new platforms that we have out there? Oh, did we lose you? I might have lost you. Should I keep talking? It still says live and recording, so I'm going to keep talking, and maybe you'll pop back up on my screen here. But what I did was look at those different platforms, decide which one could work best for me. I looked at some other companies, like saw what Apple does when you get your iPhone and what an experience it is to open that iPhone. It just doesn't come in a manila envelope. It comes in this package that is very well thought out. So it's all part of that customer experience. So I do the same thing when my books launch. I send them out to certain people in a box that they can open, that's branded, is related to the book in certain ways, has some things inside there. So it's an experience that they can then share with their audience. But I looked at social media. I then slowly waded in, but I studied it the way I would anything else. And then as I crept up on publication, I realized that writing is a business just like any other, and you have to do all those same things. And social media is one of those.
Hey, Jack, this is Chris here jumping in. We lost Jon for a second. He should be popping right back up. But tell us a little bit more about that, kind of your exploration into, becoming a small business, right? I mean, did you have any experience with it before? Was this kind of a shock to you? How has that experience been for you?
Yep. So it's all been baptism by fire, I will say. And so I looked at people like Black Rifle Coffee, looked at Apple, looked at Red Bull, looked at people who had grown audiences in a way that was on brand, that shared their experience without oversharing. So I took note of all those things. And I look at social media kind of the same way I would if I owned a general store in small town America, is the best way that I can look at it. So people come in, and whether they just asking for directions or they want to buy a 6-pack or a candy bar or whatever else, I treat them the same way if someone was in person walking into my general store. And I want them to have that good customer experience, because I want that person walking into my general store to then leave and want to come back, or leave and, better yet, tell a friend to come to that general store. So I look at it the same way. I treat people on social media the same way I would in real life. I try. And that goes the other way too. If someone walks into your general store and they're not acting appropriately, they get booted. So same thing. Boom. I like that block feature on social media. It's the same way of tossing somebody out of your store. But yeah, I want that person to come in and have a good experience and then come back, whether they buy something or not. So I look at most of the year as providing something of value on social media. I think before I post something, hey, if I'm on the receiving end of this, is this something of value to me, or am I just wasting someone's time? Because that is our most valuable asset. And I don't want people wasting my time. I don't want to waste other people's time. I want to add to their experience. So that's what I try to do with my social media, is add to their experience and provide something of value throughout the year that is not just, hey, buy my book. And I want to share that experience with people, because people hear about how hard it is to become a SEAL or how hard it is to get published by a major publishing house. And one of my mantras is always never pay attention to the odds. Never pay attention to those people that are just going to tell you how hard it is to do something, because that's wasted bandwidth. And you only have so much of it. So you can either spend that time, worried about how hard buds is, or what you can do? You can be doing push-ups, you can be doing pull-ups, you can be doing sprints up hills, you can be reading things that are going to make you a better operator. Same thing with writing. You can just worry about how hard it is to get published, how hard it is to find an agent, how hard it is to get something made into a series on Amazon or Netflix or whatever it is. You know what? That is bandwidth that is not being utilized in a productive way. You can say, okay, it's tough, check. That's why I need to work so hard and make this the best product that it can possibly be. And then you focus all your bandwidth on getting ready for buds, being a better operator while you're in the team, competing with those guys on your team to make each other better. And here in publishing, that needs to be focused on making that product as good as it can possibly be for someone before they show it to that agent or before they show it to that publisher. So I kind of look at it in those terms.
So speaking of bandwidth, and I know that we're on limited time, but I wanted just to give you a chance to talk about the new book or anything you can share with us on your fourth book here, and kind of where are you kind of making the shift, right? Where is this one going in that sense?
Yeah. So each book has a certain theme, and I got that from Stephen Pressfield, who, when he was on Rogan, and Stephen Pressfield wrote Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, the Afghan Campaign, and he has a series of books on creativity that are right over there on my shelf. And one of them is called The War of Art. Another one's called Turning Pro. Another one's called The Authentic Swing. And it's really for anybody in the creative space. In his case, he's an author, so writing comes naturally, but it can be whatever. It can be sculpting, it can be painting, it can be really anything in life. And he said that he would, and I got this wrong. I in my mind, I thought this is what he said. I thought he said he took a yellow sticky, wrote the theme of his novel on it, and put it next to his typewriter. And so in my mind, that's what I did. The real story, now that we're friends, is he was telling a story about a playwright who did that and who wrote a sentence or two about the theme of the play. And for some reason in my head, I just was like, one word, one theme on my computer, boom. So for that first one, I wrote revenge. And the first one is really about revenge without constraint. So I put that on my computer. That was right there. And I think that helped in editing, because very few things were edited when it came back from New York for that first round of edits. And I thought there was going to be a ton, because I thought, this is Simon & Schuster, there's going to be a ton of edits, they're going to make this thing really good. And there's only a couple. It was like, would he say this here? Would he do this here? And that's because I had that yellow sticky on there that said revenge, so that any sentence, paragraph, chapter, if it didn't directly or indirectly tie back to that theme, it was gone. So I was editing as I worked, which most people will tell you not to do. But it was just natural to do that and to stay on theme. Second one is really about redemption. And I call it a violent redemption. And I think people relate to that one because everyone's going to go through transitions in life, just like the main character in the novels. You're going to get knocked down in life. You're going to switch jobs at some point, maybe divorce, whatever it is. There's going to be transitional periods in life. My experience was coming from the SEAL teams and moving to the private sector, and also observing how people made transitions from that community into the private sector. So I really had that to draw on and apply that to this fictional narrative. Third one really explores the dark side of man through the hunter-hunted dynamic. And that's the one I wanted to explore since the 6th grade, when I read The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, which is a 1924 short story that is still taught in many schools around the country. But I knew even back then that one day I'd write a fictional thriller that paid tribute to that short story. So that's Savage Son. And the fourth one really explores the legality, the ethics and the morals behind targeted assassinations, which is something that's more closely associated with the government of Israel than it is with our country and our government. But we do it just like we did in January with the Soleimani hit in Iraq. But that's really the theme of this fourth one. And then what the protagonist has to deal with is a bioweapon. And I was deep into studying infectious diseases and the weaponization of infectious diseases well before COVID-19 hit. So I was hypersensitive to it when I started seeing these things in late December, early January, into February, of course. But that's really what the fourth one is all about, that legality, ethics, and morals behind targeted assassinations, and how the protagonist now has to wrestle with that now that he knows he's not dying and he's moving forward here into this next phase of his life.
Jack, fabulous stuff. And I'm sorry, this is John. I'm sorry I had to drop off there. For some reason, all of a sudden we got a power surge here in the house, knocked everything down, and I had to reboot and come back.
No worries.
But let me give you a chance real quick to say about so the gear that you sell, including your hat, that gear supports causes that you care about. So I'd love it if you had an opportunity to tell people about it.
Yeah, so my website's officialjackcarr.com for people that are interested in kind of more of a deep dive into the weapons or the gear. And every month I post 6 books from my reading list, and I talk about how they impacted me at certain points in my life. And so that's all on there, that for people that want a little more of that. But then there's a gear section, and you click that and it goes to Jack Carr USA, which is the gear merchandise type website. And before COVID-19 hit, all those profits were going to the 5 or 6 different veterans organizations that are highlighted on the website there. And they're all organizations that I have some sort of a touch point with. So there weren't ones that I just grabbed out of thin air that looked good or looked on brand or something like that. No, they're all ones where I am personally invested, because either I did something with them, they did something for me, they did something for a friend of mine. I know people involved. So there's a personal touch point with each and every one of those. And I was looking for a way to give back, because I didn't want to just, all of a sudden have a certain number of followers and now try to sell them t-shirts. I just didn't really sit well with me. So I wanted to have this be something that was well thought out, has some cool stuff like this bookmark, which is pretty cool. It has a 5.56 round attached to it, and it's a veteran-owned company called Direct Action USA. Has my little theme for my life in there, never tell me the odds, and then a bone frog on it to remember those guys that didn't make it home. But all those profits go to those veteran-focused foundations that are on that website. But after COVID-19, I shifted that for the short term to go to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy COVID-19 Response Fund until we're through this pandemic. Then I'll shift it back to those veteran-focused foundations at some point. But yeah, the hats and bottle breachers and bookmarks and all that, coffee cups, all that sort of thing, all those profits go to those organizations.
Well, that is so cool, and I love that you dialed all these things in. Everything in from that, Jack, to Icon, and what they do, rebuilding these vehicles back better than they were.
Oh yeah.
To Black Rifle Coffee, because I'm a big fan.
Oh yeah.
5-pound bags.
Oh yeah, so do we. Yeah, we get them every month.
Yep. I'm on it every 2 months.
Oh, nice.
Because I ended up alternating a little bit during the week.
Yeah.
Black Rifle, and then I'll do something from a Chicago-based roaster called Intelligentsia.
Ah, okay, nice.
Really good. If you ever want a really good espresso, their espresso roast, it's called Black Cat.
Nice.
It's amazing.
Nice. Yeah, when you really get into coffee, it's being friends with Evan Hafer, who's the CEO of Black Rifle Coffee and founder of Black Rifle. Man, he's as passionate about coffee as I am about writing, or as my friend Matt Graham is about the Aries watches he builds. It's so great when you see people, and in this case, veterans, get out and are so passionate about something, and you can really tell in the way they talk about it that's their thing. And so for Evan, it's coffee. And so walking through Black Rifle with him, or having him explain the difference between like a Starbucks or a Folgers and then a small batch roaster type thing, like they have so much knowledge and are so passionate about it. It's so cool. That probably makes the coffee taste better when you actually taste it, because it is very different than those big ones that are just pushing beans through and just essentially burning them to get them out there because they have to get so much volume out. So yeah, I'm a big fan of those, the small batch roasters, and Black Rifle in particular, of course.
All right. Well, Jack, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time. Folks, Simon & Schuster is the publisher. His books, of course, True Believer, Savage Son, The Terminal List. Chris Pratt's going to be starring in the series that'll be on Amazon. And if you want, you can follow Jack, again, the website for you is?
So, yeah, officialjackcarr.com is the website. And then social media platforms are Jack Carr USA. I'm most active on Instagram, but Instagram, Twitter also, and then also Facebook. But Facebook really just reposts from Instagram because 3 was too many.
Yep.
Especially at this stage, I'm still trying to like say thank you or at least give a little heart to people that reach out because I appreciate them taking the time to reach out to me. And really making the New York Times list, that was all, and the success of these is all grassroots. Chris Pratt didn't announce the Amazon thing till after I made the list. Didn't go on Joe Rogan until after. I would have taken it ahead of time, believe me. But those didn't happen ahead of time. So it was really somebody taking a risk on an unknown author and then telling a friend. And maybe telling the 10 people to follow them on social media or the 10,000 people or whatever it may be. So it was really a grassroots effort, and I'm sincerely appreciative. So I try to get back to everybody. And if I miss you, it wasn't intentional, but I'm about also to that stage where I'm not going to be able to get back to everyone anymore, but still trying to do the best I can because I sincerely appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it. I encourage everybody to check out the books and to support the causes that Jack is supporting here, folks. Jack, I'll be back out there skiing soon, and
Awesome.
I hope sometime we can either have a drink or a run together.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. I sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, let's do it again soon.
All right. Thank you, sir. Enjoy.